Hello and welcome back to I Completed 80s Music with me, the 80s Mixtaper, and with something of a special show for you today. For today, folks, we hit our first big milestone. Yes, that's right, we complete 1980. The first of our 10 years is done, but before we get to our year-end review, we have 5 songs left, only 5 on playlist 17. As you know, they're normally 13-song playlists to mimic the compilation albums of the past, and we break the songs down into 2 episodes, but I figured we'd start 1981 with a clean sheet, and hence we've just the last 5 songs remaining on the year. But what are 5 songs we have today to conclude the year? We have a film hit from Queen, The Police going Do-Do-Do-Do-Lally, Visage with one of the greatest synth tracks of the era, Stevie Wonder doing a country impression, and then we end the year with some proper funky funk from Yarbrough and Peoples. Let's get straight into it today and jump into the music. Let's start today by talking about the Queen song that dares to shout its own name across the universe like a bolt of camp thunder. A track that opens with a very menacing, bassy one piano note and bass drum giving a monotonous dun 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 dun. It's Queen's Flash from the Flash Gordon soundtrack, released in November 1980. A single so gloriously absurd, so committed to its own sci-fi theatrics, it briefly turned British radio into a laser battle. This is track 1 today. Gordon's alive! Sorry, couldn't resist doing my best Brian Blessed impression there. Flash by Queen peaked at number 10 on the UK charts, nestled in a top 10 that December, alongside ABBA's Super Trooper, Blondie's The Tide Is High, and John Lennon's Just Like Starting Over. It was the Queen you didn't expect, bombastic, yes, but not exactly a stadium anthem. This was Queen as a space opera. So how did this happen? Why did one of the biggest rock bands in the world, fresh off their global conquest with The Game and Another One Bites the Dust, suddenly turn their attention to a pulp comic hero from the 1930s? The answer is, of course, producer Dino De Laurentiis, a man who loves cinema with the appetite of somebody who treated movies like 12-course meals. He was producing the new adaptation of Flash Gordon, and he had a vision. He wanted a soundtrack to feel big, bombastic, comic booky, not some orchestral wash of strings and horns. He needed a band that could be both flamboyant and serious, a band that could write a chorus catchy enough to rival Superman's theme, but weird enough to sound like it came from another planet. Queen got the call. This wasn't just a paycheck gig. Freddie Mercury, Brian May, Roger Taylor and John Deacon were all sci-fi nerds to some degree. May especially, he'd later get a PhD in astrophysics. He composed the score, weaving together instrumental pieces and a couple of proper songs. The first and most famous, Flash's theme, later shortened to Flash for single release. It's part song, part dialogue montage, part warning siren. It's not structured like a rock song, no verse, chorus, verse. It's more like a highlight reel from a trailer that exploded. The first sound you hear is that sort of pulsing beat and piano note. Then, in a voice like velvet thunder, Freddie Mercury sings, "Flash, saver of the universe." Not of the world, not of mankind, he's saving the universe, thank you very much. The song throws you headfirst into a space war with no introduction, and the lyrics, what there are of them, are essentially interjections. It's like Queen watched the whole movie and tried to write a song that sounded like a recap shouted through a megaphone. He'll save every one of us. Brian May said in interviews that the idea was to make the soundtrack an integral part of the film, not just an accompaniment. The music bleeds in and out of the action. The single version of Flash actually includes dialogue from the film itself, delivered with full melodrama by various actors, including Melody Anderson, who played Dale Arden. It's part pop song, part audio drama, part fever dream. Flash hit number 10 in the UK, just another top 10 single to Queen by that point. In the US, it peaked at a more modest number 42 on the Billboard Hot 100. Not bad, considering America had no idea what to do with that movie. Flash Gordon the film has since become a cult classic, campy and ridiculous and brilliant all at once. The music is a big reason why. You cannot hear Flash and not feel like something urgent is happening, even if you have no idea what. It's operatic, it's over the top, and it's absolutely Queen. There's something wild about the fact that Queen, who'd spent the 70s inventing arena rock with Bohemian Rhapsody and We Are the Champions and Don't Stop Me Now, entered the new decade by basically scoring a B-movie space epic. It's not even the biggest thing they did in 1980. They dropped The Game, their most commercial album to date, which went to number 1 in the US and the UK. But Flash is the one that feels like pure distilled Queen, genre-defiant, ludicrous and brilliant. It didn't become a concert staple, but it remains one of the most iconic songs, thanks to pop culture inertia. Queen didn't just write a soundtrack, they became the soundtrack. They didn't play behind the movie, they stood in front of it, capes billowing, guitars blazing, Freddie Mercury belting into the cosmos. He's for every one of us, stands for every one of us. As ridiculous as it is, it hits like a declaration of hope. Somehow, against all odds, it works. Even Brian Blessed still shouts Gordon's alive on command. Track 2 today. Is it nonsense? Is it brilliance? The Police are already huge by the time Zenyatta Mondatta lands in October 1980. Not just chart huge, but arena huge, global huge. Their single, Don't Stand So Close to Me, the lead off to Zenyatta, had gone straight to number 1 on the UK singles chart in September. Stayed there for 4 weeks, and gave Sting a perfect storm of critical acclaim, tabloid gossip bait, and awkward English teacher backstory to deflect for the next 40 years. So what do you do for a follow-up? You release a song called Da-Do-Do-Do Da-Da-Da-Da, and you make damn sure it sounds like both a nursery rhyme and a riddle. Released in the UK on the 12th of December 1980, Da-Do-Do-Do Da-Da-Da-Da entered the charts at number 27 and peaked at number 5. Remember that this is all during a Christmas chart time dominated by There's No One Quite Like Grandma by the St Winifred School Choir, which should tell you everything about the weird terrain of late 1980 British pop. But Da-Do-Do-Do Da-Da-Da-Da is no novelty. It's cynical, it's calculated, it's brilliant, and it's annoying on purpose. It's 3 guys, Sting, Stuart Copeland, and Andy Summers, taking the piss out of pop music while also delivering the most earworthy single on the album. It opens so abruptly, Summers with those angular guitar stabs, minimalist and menacing, Copeland dancing around the beat like he's got a grudge against the hi-hat, and Sting's voice cutting in half mocking, half mournful. Don't think me unkind. Words are hard to find. They're only checks I've left unsigned from the banks of chaos in my mind. That's about as Sting a metaphor as you can write. Banking imagery, inner turmoil, poetic detachment. The guy's lyrical Rolodex in 1980 is already all soft politics and romantic doom. But then comes the chorus. You know it already. Everyone knows it. Da-do-do-do, da-da-da-da is all I want to say to you. Da-do-do-do, da-da-da-da. Their innocence will pull me through. It's dumb, it's brilliant, it's meant to be both. In a 1981 interview with the NME, Sting stated, Da-do-do-do, for example, was grossly misunderstood. The lyrics are about banality, about the abuse of words. Almost everyone who reviewed it said, oh, this is baby talk. They were just listening to the chorus alone, obviously. But they're the same people who would probably never get through the first paragraph of Finnegan's Wake, because that's baby talk too. I know that sounds pretentious, but in that song, I was trying to say something which was really quite difficult. That people like politicians, like myself even, use words to manipulate people, and that you should be very careful. The verses flirt with serious topics, with commentary about political and media language. For example, poets, priests and politicians have words to thank for their positions, words that scream for your submission, and no one's jamming their transition. There's a whole essay packed into that stanza, the kind Sting would have given to you on lined A4 paper back when he was teaching at St Paul's First School in Cramlington. It's all about power, language, propaganda, how the institutions talk, and we're just expected to nod along. And then boom, back to the chorus. Gibberish as gospel. Has anything changed? Well, if you look at today's politics, probably not. It was a hit in the US too. The song peaked at number 10 on the Billboard Hot 100 in early 1981, continuing the Police's run of American success that had started with Roxanne and Message in a Bottle, and would later peak with Every Breath You Take in 1983. But in the UK, where the charts were heading towards their annual holiday sugar coma, it landed firmly at number 5, more than respectable, but slightly anticlimactic compared to the number 1 success of Don't Stand So Close to Me. And you can hear a band pulling in different directions here. Stuart Copeland called Zenyatta Mondatta a nightmare to make. They were rushed, they were exhausted, they were already getting sick of each other. But out of that chaos came songs like this. Minimalist, but loaded, with dumb-sounding but weirdly profound, biting and catchy words at the same time. They even recorded versions of it in Spanish and Japanese. This wasn't a quirky side project. This was a calculated move to expand their international profile, especially in Latin America and Japan, where their popularity was surging. But even that's kind of the point. You're singing along to syllables because the actual words, the checks from the banks of chaos, are too complicated, too corrupt, too compromised. Or maybe you were just singing along because it's catchy as hell. Next up, a song that arrives wearing eyeliner, shoulder pads, and futuristic dread like it's haute couture. December 1980, Visage drop Fade to Grey, a single that doesn't so much enter the UK top 10 as it slithers in, stares you down, and demands that you recognise the future. It peaked at number 8 on the UK chart and hung around for 15 weeks. And for a few surreal minutes, this weird, melancholic synth elegy becomes the calling card for an entire scene. The Blitz Kids, the New Romantics, the underground rising up in platform boots, kilts, ruffled shirts, and PVC. Visage weren't your typical bunch of mates from school with a 4-track and a garage. They were more like an art project or a glam Frankenstein's monster. They started forming in 1978 when Steve Strange, who, yes, was actually named Steve Harrington but wisely decided he needed to sound weirder, joined forces with Rusty Egan, drummer of Rich Kids. Strange was a face around the London scene, briefly managed the punk band The Moors Murderers, and had been booking clubs for a while. He and Egan bonded over electronic music, especially the kind you had to import from Germany, namely Kraftwerk. They started DJing at a club night called Bowie Night at Billy's in Soho, a night for outcasts, futurists, glam fans, and stragglers from punk who thought that maybe punk wasn't for them. That night became the Blitz Club in Covent Garden, which became the crucible of New Romanticism. Entry wasn't about money, it was about style. If Steve didn't like your outfit, you weren't getting in. Boy George worked in the cloakroom. Spandau Ballet formed there. It was Studio 54, except everyone looked like they'd just time-travelled from a dystopian drag show set in 2085. Visage was the soundtrack to that. Alongside Strange and Egan, the band eventually included Midge, Billy Currie, Dave Formula, Barry Adamson, Chris Payne, and John McGeoch. This wasn't a traditional band, it was a collective of already busy musicians, threading time in between their other commitments. Most of them couldn't tour with Visage, even if they wanted to. And yet, Fade to Grey is their Mona Lisa. It was composed initially as an instrumental by Payne and Currie. Midge helped arrange the track. Strange added the lyrics later. The famous bilingual lines weren't his, though. The French voice was provided by Brigitte Arends, Egan's Belgian girlfriend at the time, who translated and recited the lyrics into a microphone, deadpan, chic and spooky. The verses go like this. One man on a lonely train, one case sitting by his side, two eyes staring cold and silent, show fear as he turns to hide, and Brigitte was whispering Devenir Gris. The literal translation of Devenir Gris is to become grey, a more poetic rendering of Fade to Grey. This is not a hopeful song, it's minimalism with drama, European alienation with a nightclub pulse. It's lacking catharsis, a lift, just a slow motion spiral into detachment with synths that shimmer like neon reflections on wet asphalt. Released on Polydor, Fade to Grey made Visage into Unlikely Stars. The single charted across Europe, number 1 in Germany and Switzerland, number 2 in Austria, and top 10 in France and Italy. But in the UK, despite being the unofficial anthem of the Blitz Kids, it had to fight its way up the charts in the shadow of John Lennon's posthumous releases and the tail end of 1980s chart weirdness. When it reached number 8, that was a big deal. Synth pop hadn't entirely taken over yet. Fade to Grey lives in that tension between punk's collapse and MTV's birth. You can hear Bowie's Low in its bones and Kraftwerk's The Man Machine, and maybe even Roxy Music's Avalon if you're squinting. But it's also pre-Depeche Mode, pre-Eurythmics, pre-Dare era Human League. It's the bridge, emotionally frozen, musically progressive. Fade to Grey becomes the anthem of a generation who looked to Europe for inspiration. The whole aesthetic of Fade to Grey, the sound, the video directed by Godley and Cream, drenched in abstract shadows, mannequin face makeup, and mirror effects. The hair, it's hard to overstate how much this looked like the future. Even as the lyrics are about losing hope, the packaging is brazenly forward-facing. But Visage never really had another hit like this. Their follow-up singles, Mind of a Toy, The Damned Don't Cry, Night Train, were minor chart players. The Damned Don't Cry is a great song, by the way. We'll feature it on this podcast. But never again touched the cultural nerve that Fade to Grey hit. Steve Strange was forever synonymous with this one song, even as his own career swerved into heroin addiction, club promotion, reality TV cameos, and a short-lived Visage revival before his death in 2015. Still, what a legacy. Visage may have been a studio project, a side hustle, a fashion-forward experiment in synth and swagger, but Fade to Grey is a reminder that sometimes one song is enough. Enough to define a scene, enough to soundtrack an era, enough to walk into a club in 1980 wearing 3 layers of eyeliner and feeling like the future is yours. For track 4, in late 1980, Stevie Wonder released a single called I Ain't Gonna Stand For It. It was the second single from Hotter Than July, and it sounded unlike anything he'd done. Weird, in fact. In a great way. In a double take, what is this kind of way. The man who gave us Superstition and Living for the City suddenly turned into a raspy-voiced cowboy. A whole new vocal persona. He's twanging, he's drawling, and it's completely intentional. Press play now. Let's rewind slightly. Hotter Than July is a weird, brilliant transitional record. It came after The Secret Life of Plants, his strange, ambient, sometimes beautiful, sometimes baffling soundtrack to a documentary about plant sentience. So Hotter Than July feels like Wonder resetting, back to pop, back to songs, back to verses and choruses and hooks. The first single, Master Blaster, was a reggae-infused Bob Marley tribute that cracked the UK top 3, which we covered in episode 13.5. So the next single, naturally, was a country soul crossover ballad with pedal steel guitar and a narrator who sounds like he's been smoking filterless Camels since age 6. On I Ain't Gonna Stand For It, Stevie growls his way through a country soul tale of jealousy and suspicion. It's still Stevie, his voice is obvious, but there's a southern drawl being put on, and the lyrics, when you stop and read them, are pure soap opera. Don't want to believe what they're telling me. Somebody's been picking in my cherry tree. Don't want to mistrust nobody by mistake, but I can tell someone's been digging around in my cake. No, this isn't You Are the Sunshine of My Life. This is Wait, Who's Been in My Business. Stevie leans into heartbreak with theatrical gusto. The way he delivers the line, somebody's shoes was under my bed, is all old bluesman suspicion and wounded ego. But the music behind it is pure groove, tight, mid-tempo, anchored by Nathan Watts on bass, and that gloriously warbling steel guitar by Hank DeVito. And the backing vocals, that's Charlie and Ronnie Wilson from the Gap Band, which is kind of perfect. Steve doing country, the Gap Band doing country backup. Nothing about this song should work, but it does. It peaked at number 10 on the UK singles chart in January 1981. In the US, it hit number 11 on the Billboard Hot 100. Didn't quite break the top 10 in America, but it's still one of his more unique charting singles. It's never remembered the same way as Isn't She Lovely or Happy Birthday is remembered, but maybe it should be. It's the kind of genre experiment that makes Wonder so hard to pin down, even in the 1980s, even when his legend was already carved in stone. It's fairy tale jealousy filtered through country melodrama, all sung by one of the greatest vocalists in pop history, deliberately making his voice sound busted, rough, lived in, like he's been wronged, like he can't bear it, like he might just stand for it anyway, but not tonight. And yet, Wonder didn't need permission to try new voices, he just did it. That's part of what made the Hotter Than July era so interesting. He was expanding, playing with tone, genre, even identity. He'd soon be writing Happy Birthday for Martin Luther King Jr., then getting it played on the radio until the US made it a national holiday. He was about to do that. But in between, he became a country singer. This song wasn't a one-off either. Eric Clapton covered it on his 2001 album Reptile, of all things. It's fine, it exists, but Clapton's version lacks the tension, the tightness, the weird magic of Stevie growling through the song. By the end of the track, the vocal mask comes off just a little. You hear a glimpse of classic Stevie right before it fades out, like he's letting you know, don't worry, I'm still me, I'm just having fun. And that's why this song matters, because even in the middle of reinvention, Stevie Wonder never stopped being Stevie Wonder. He just changed the channel. For a few glorious minutes, he gave us a heartbreak ballad with a steel guitar and a jealous cowboy growl. And somehow, it worked. And so, the final track of 1980 has arrived. So our final track bookends our very first track on the pod. We started with 70s funk disco. We'll end 1980 with funk. The mirror ball's still spinning, sure, but it's barely spinning. And funk's not dead. It's leaner now, cooler, synthier, skating sideways into a neon future. And on the dance floor, pulsing from your cousin's cassette boombox, or the speakers at the skating rink or the dashboard of your dad's Oldsmobile, there's this voice, this synth line, this hypnotic command. Don't you stop it, don't you stop, don't stop the music. You don't, you can't, you don't even want to. Today, we're talking about Yarbrough and Peoples. Sounds like a law firm specialising in groove-related injuries. And this is their legal remedy. Don't stop the music. This is track 5 and the final song of 1980. Calvin Yarbrough and Elisa Peoples, both from Dallas, both steeped in music since they were kids. They met in school. Elisa had the voice, clear and assured and silky but with bite. Calvin had the keys, literally, figuratively, spiritually. Not just duo with a shared interest in grooves, lockstep, talk through synths kind of chemistry, the kind of musical connection that makes you believe in fate, or at least in the organising power of a Charlie Wilson cosign. Because it was Charlie Wilson, that Charlie Wilson, the Gap band Charlie Wilson, who heard something in them and helped to get them to LA, to Total Experience Records, where producer Lonnie Simmons was building a whole empire of elastic bass lines and endless party anthems. Lonnie Simmons is the guy who made the Gap band explode, and he does the same thing here. He raps Don't Stop the Music in this tight, pristine rhythm, but with a layer of electronic funk that feels like it's sliding into 1981 with a swagger. The song drops in 1980. No slow burn here, it's immediate. Hit number 1 on the Billboard R&B chart. Crossed over into the pop world like it meant it, peaking at number 19 on the Hot 100. And in the UK, even better, number 7. And the lyrics, let's not pretend they're subtle. The beat keeps going round and round, it keeps me upside down. And that sped up chant, you don't really want to stop. No, feels less like a hook and more like an order. It's mantra level repetition. You're not being asked, you're being compelled. The production's pure magic, that compelling continuous rhythm, the tight circle of it all, the way the beat almost bounces off the walls like it's trying to escape the speakers. Elisa's vocals, crisp and commanding, a kind of confident glide that tells you she's the boss of this groove and you're lucky just to ride along. Yarbrough and Peoples weren't just filling space between Gap Band singles, they were laying down their own kind of map, pointing the way from 70s soul into something sleeker, more digitised, but no less human. Their stuff still moves, literally and emotionally. If you want legacy, play Don't Stop the Music in any room, any era, and it still lands. DJs still spin it, R&B heads still nod to it, TikTok kids still discover it, and somewhere in the cosmos, the beat still goes round and round, still turning somebody upside down. It's 1980, it's a Saturday night, you're wearing something shiny, you're in love with everybody, at least for the next 4 minutes and 30 seconds. And what a fitting end to the year, a song that asks you literally to don't stop the music as we faced the next 9 years of the 80s. So there you have it, folks. That is a wrap on 1980. Firstly, to everyone who has listened from the start, well done. You've just completed the music of 1980. That in itself is monumental. I'll be completely honest, I never thought I would have either the audience or the drive to do this, because ultimately it's a shitload of music and stories to power through. So thank you to everyone who has gone the distance. So far, that's been 213 songs. That's a lot of me, and it's a lot of music. What I'd like to do is take some reflections now of 1980 in the form of awards, and then look forward with you to 1981 and discuss what's in store. So now, let's reflect on the first year of the decade. Best Solo Artist and Best Band. Starting with Solo Artist, both in terms of volume and quality, there is only really two contenders, Diana Ross and Sheena Easton. Gary Newman has a couple of hits, but it's arguably too niche, and those songs have almost no resonance now. Joan Armour Trading suffers from exactly the same problem. Important contributions, but not exactly pop. If you were doing this by Best Male and Best Female, you could easily make the case for Jonah Louie to be Best Male for Stop the Cavalry and You'll Always Find Me in the Kitchen at Parties. Both songs which still do the rounds today, but I feel they do the rounds as they're both effectively novelty records. Kenny Rogers lays the groundwork for country going mainstream with Coward of the County and Lady. Curtis Blow does the same for hip-hop with The Breaks. Bowie drops Ashes to Ashes, but his main work is in the previous decade. Jacko is kicking off his solo career, but this isn't the Thriller era yet, so we can't give it to him. And Olivia Newton-John's contributions, while pretty, are for a failed film. Stevie Wonder and Bob Marley both make big contributions, but you can argue that Marley's 70s were bigger, as were Wander's, and Wander's big 80s are only really just kicking off. Realistically, if we're looking at invention and reinvention, volume of hits and potential meaning to the rest of the decade, then we have to be looking at Sheena Easton and Diana Ross. Diana Ross is already a superstar by the turn of the decade, and she delivers 3 hits, 2 of which absolutely reinvent her for the new decade, with the help of Nile Rodgers and Bernard Edwards. Upside Down, in contention for Best Song, and I'm Coming Out, a great song which has gone on to mean a lot to the LGBT community and also rap aficionados. My Old Piano is kind of an also-ran in between those two, but are those 80s songs? That's a toughie, because Chic, while creative, have a sound born of the 70s. If you want 70s funk, look at Chic. If you want 80s funk, look at Yarbrough and Peoples, which we heard in this very episode. Sheena Easton is an absolute newcomer, literally someone we all followed from a televised talent show. But Modern Girl and Morning Train tie so nicely into bookending the devoted housewife era with the women's empowerment movement of the 80s, you can't ignore it. Furthermore, Modern Girl is the first song we get to that absolutely positively sounds like an 80s song. It's so upbeat, so fresh, so forward-thinking with its polished synths and pop production. One Man Woman we can kind of take or leave. The problem of calling it for Easton is she's kind of done at this point as a major player. She's not a one-hit wonder, but she is kind of a one-year wonder. She releases the Bond theme for Your Eyes Only in 1981 and drops a few other tracks, but nothing which stands out so sharply as her 1980 trifecta. So do you give it to the 60s and 70s diva who reinvents herself and drops two phenomenal songs important to her catalogue, or do you give it to the fresh-faced herald of the 80s who has two songs we can say feel like the opening of the 80s? Well, I think it has to be Sheena Easton, precisely for the fact that those two songs feel like the start of something. And that something is the 80s sound. While her contribution to the decade is somewhat short, that sound from both Modern Girl and Morning Train feels like it could soundtrack a number of rom-coms from the decade, but not in the 70s. I'm not sure the same could be said for Upside Down, and I'm coming out. So what about best group, best band? Well, while there are a lot of runners and riders, I think the answer is a lot more simple. You could go down the ska route, and the two big names of Madness and the Specials would both be worthy choices. However, neither of them have a lot of transatlantic appeal. The Clash are also moving away from punk with their singles in the 1980. Also, by the end of 1980, ska is kind of petering out and both bands are already exploring new sounds. ABBA are doing ABBA, but, it's ABBA sounding entirely like ABBA. OMD released Messages and Enola Gay, both heraldic songs announced in the 80s. The Jam are perhaps the biggest British band for sure, and were at the height of their pomp, or perhaps you'd prefer the Police. Queen released 3 songs, but only Another One Bites the Dust really stands out. Judas Priest set the pace and the template and the look for what rock and metal should be in the future. And Kool and the Gang are transatlantic and released probably the biggest party song of the year. But none of these are the answer. Of course, the answer is Blondie. Blondie nail 1980 in a way no other band does. Atomic, Call Me, The Tide is High. Transatlantic appeal, Grammys, the lot. While the Police's Don't Stand So Close to Me is the best-selling single, all 3 Blondie songs went to number 1 and pretty much cemented Blondie's place in the pantheon of bands, and Debbie Harry is a sex symbol. Nobody else really comes close. But it's not just the stats and the statuses. All 3 songs are innovative and differ in a way that neither the Police or the Jam do. Blondie owned 1980. Best song. Well, we'll do this one by the numbers. For the UK charts, the top 5 best-selling singles of 1980 are Ottawan, Disco at number 5. At number 4, ABBA with Super Trooper. At number 3, Kelly Marie with Feels Like I'm in Love. At number 2, Barbra Streisand, Woman in Love. And number 1, the aforementioned Police with Don't Stand So Close to Me. My favourite song. Well, there are loads of great songs in 1980. Too many to count them all. And arguably about 95% of the choices I've made of the 213 songs are because I like them and they chime with me. But with that having been said, there are a couple of honourable mentions. So Diana Ross's Upside Down, which we heard in 11.5. I love the Chic-inspired melody to the song, and it just gives Ross that edge I think she lost by the end of the 70s. It's an absolutely phenomenal song. And then Madness's Baggy Trousers in episode 13.5. That was a childhood favourite, and I just love the sheer nutty silliness of it all. But my favourite song of 1980 is Ant Music by Adam and the Ants. Not only is it a brilliant song, but I love the idea that the song could be a massive diss track aimed at Malcolm McLaren. It also feels like the moment when the bands of the 1980s literally kick the door down and, as the lyrics say, turn off the jukebox and listen to this. You just get to the end of it and feel pumped for the rest of the decade. And it ties in with OMD's appearance, the Blitz Kids, Spandau Ballet, and as we'll see early in 1981, Duran Duran. Most important song. Well, I don't think we need to dwell too long on this. You could say Buggles and the Plastic Age, which we heard really early on in this podcast. Ironically, not for the song, but because the song made Trevor Horn decide to quit being a frontman and become the greatest producer of the 1980s. You could say Enola Gay by OMD, as it just shows what synth pop could do. But arguably, it's The Breaks by Curtis Blow. Barely charted in the UK, but it is one of a few tunes which are now responsible for a multi-billion-dollar rap industry. Best Newcomer. That goes to Adam and the Ant, simply for the reason that they're the first proper 80s band that we see, the first massively iconic 80s icon. They're about to have a huge 1981, and it really feels like they kick the doors open on the decade, which no one else really does. There is no alternative. Finally, biggest trend. Well, synth pop would be the obvious answer as it ripples through the year in some form or another. But I really think the answer is the changing of the guard. If you were with us from the start, you'll know that in those first four playlists covering the last chart of 1979, there's still a lot of proper disco, as in disco with strings, think Donna Summer. There's also a lot of cheesy tunes like Babe by Styx and Spirits Having Flown by the Bee Gees, or the kind of the 70s dirges like The Wall by Pink Floyd. And the synth pop that is there feels far more rudimentary and primal, like John Foxx's Underground. Punk is still sort of kicking around, and ska is at its peak with the Specials, the Beat, Madness, the Selector, Bad Manners, and a smattering of other acts. But actually, by the end of the year, disco is largely dead. Long live funk-driven disco songs. Punk is almost completely cooked, and the sort of cheese we heard sort of ends in the 80s, and everyone is either putting together complex synth pop or something that starts to sound like modern pop, like Spandau Ballet. Even old new wave is dying out. The Boomtown ruts are pretty much done. Roxy music are evolving, and ska is kind of done. Madness will still fuse their music with ska, but not pure ska. And the Specials are indirectly evolving into Funboy 3, and the Selector are done. So in the end, can we say that 1980 is a true reflection of the 80s as a whole? No, I don't think you can. I think by the end of the year, it does truly feel like the 80s are underway, but 80 is a transitional year. And here's the thing, 1981 is kind of more of the same, though we're in the decade for real at this point. So what do we have to look forward to? Well, there's a lot. Adam Ant are going to have a massive 1981, going from newcomer to one of the biggest bands. We will meet Soft Cell and the Human League as synth pop begins to sprawl and dominate the charts. Rockabilly has its big moment in the charts as Shakin' Stevens bursts in to become the biggest selling UK artist of the 80s. Kim Wilde literally does the same with Kids in America. Ultravox dropped one of the most iconic songs of the entire decade and a frontrunner for best song in literally the first playlist of the year. We meet Duran Duran. We get Bucks Fizz ripping off their skirts from Eurovision success. And we get lots and lots of ridiculousness from Joe Dolce, the Birdie song, and many, many more. At the end of 1980, I was just 2.5. Needless to say, I don't remember a whole heap of it. But there is a point in 1981 where suddenly, as a 3-year-old, I become cognizant of music and what it means for the first time. I hear It's My Party and I'll Cry If I Want To. I hear Shut Up Your Face. I hear This Old House. And I hear Every Little Thing She Does Is Magic. And a lifelong love and obsession with music begins. Other than that, my memories are largely eating fresh peas in my dad's garden vegetable patch and getting chased by geese. But that's another story for another time. So join us next time as we kick off Playlist 18 and January 1981, and another year as we look to complete 80s music. Have a great week. Take care.